nephrologist, you meet diabetics when they've had their disease for a long time and they're really sick, right?
Yeah, so I treat people on dialysis. That's a lot of what I do. And it's very disheartening because what happens is that when they develop their disease, they're so sick. But the diabetes itself is actually quite reversible. This is not a disease that needs to progress. But we often tell people that it's a chronic progressive disease. And that's not simply me talking, but if you go to the diabetes associations, whether it's the American Diabetes Association or the Diabetes Australia, they all put out there that this is a chronic disease. But the problem is that that's simply not true. And it's actually pretty easy to prove it, because if somebody came up to me and said, I've had diabetes, I was told I had diabetes, I watched my diet, I lost 50 pounds, I cut my carbs, I cut my sugar, and now they took me off of my medication, I'm fine now. That's obviously true. And the thing is that if that patient got better, what happens to this idea that this is a chronic progressive disease? Well, obviously the disease is actually reversible. But you have to know how to reverse it. If you don't know how to reverse it, then you're just going to get worse. And the thing is that the drugs don't actually do anything for the disease. And this is also not controversial, because the thing is that type 2 diabetes is a disease of too much insulin resistance. And that's not controversial. Everybody acknowledges the disease is actually too much insulin resistance. So the treatments that we give are all targeted at blood sugar, right? That doesn't make any sense, because you're treating the symptoms of the disease and ignoring the disease. So what happens is that because we're not treating the disease tends to progress. So that patient who went and lost weight and exercised and cut out the carbs and cut out the sugars, they actually reversed their insulin resistance, and therefore their sugars came down, which is far different than making your blood sugars go down by force, by medication, and ignoring the actual disease. So that's the fundamental mistake that we've made over this last 20, 30, 40 years.
I'm an obesity doctor. I have the honor of working with a group of people subject to the last widely accepted prejudice, being fat. These people have suffered a lot by the time they see me. Shame, guilt, blame, and outright discrimination. Obesity is a disease. It's not something created by lack of character. It's a hormonal disease, and one of the main ones is a hormone called insulin. Most obese individuals are resistant to this hormone, insulin. So what does that mean exactly, to be resistant to insulin? Well, insulin resistance is essentially a state of pre-pre type 2 diabetes. It really represents two different approaches to treating this disease. The first, our group, with the goal of reversing disease, meaning they need less medicine. And the second group, which very clearly aligns with the ADA guidelines, which states that diabetes is a progressive disease requiring more medicine over time. Progressive, unless we take away the cause. Nowhere in the ADA guidelines is the goal of reversing type 2 diabetes. This needs to be changed, because type 2 diabetes can be reversed in many, if not most situations, especially if we start early. Not only do we need to let people know this, but we have to start giving them the practical advice so they can do this. Why isn't low carb the norm? There's two big reasons. Number one, status quo. It is hard to break. There are many agendas involved. We got this notion that low fat was the way to go decades ago. But a recent study just came out showing that there was zero randomized control evidence to recommend to Americans to remove the fat from our diet. And that's how the carbs got added in. The second reason we don't see it everywhere is money. Don't be fooled. There's a lot of money to be made from keeping you sick. And what we see is with these specialty guideline panels, they are stacked with conflict. Rule number one, if it says light, low fat, or fat-free, stays in the grocery store. Because if they took the fat out, they put carbs and chemicals in. Rule number two, eat food. The most important rule in low-carb nutrition. Real food does not come in a box, and no one should have to tell you real food is natural. You should know that when you look at it. Don't eat anything you don't like. And eat when you're hungry. Don't eat when you're not, no matter what the clock says. And number 5 is a simple way to remember what we want to avoid. No GPS. No grains, no potatoes, and no sugar. So the solution to the diabetes epidemic in my clinic is exceedingly clear. Stop using medicine to treat food. And for a disease whose root cause is carbohydrates, take away the carbohydrates or at least cut them so we can remember what we used to know. We knew it a long time ago. This was said thousands of years ago. And we need, in this day and age,